Story 1. When a child I was supervising told me they were born in 2017. Edit. I work in childcare. Story 2. When you just do not want to do things you enjoy, do not want to go out to eat, do not want to see friends. Not from a depressed standpoint, but just from a you would rather not deal with the logistics or the hassle kind of thing. Story 3. I was waiting for the bus. Two teenagers were waiting as well, and they were talking about movies. One girl said, "I saw an old movie the other day called Titanic." I scoffed and realized it was a 30-year-old movie. Then, to cap it off, she said, "It's from the last century." I had to sit down. Story 4. I saw a post about a star-studded Hollywood event, and I had not heard of a single person on the list, not even in passing. Story 5. When people post memes about old video games and I do not know what game it is because it came out after I stopped playing video games. Story 6. I told a story about how I bought another pair of the same shoes I like because the brand tends to cycle out their models quickly. I thought it was a great idea. Then my family told me I had already shared this story. Story 7. When my son was getting married, I had a difficult time finding a dress. I told him all the dresses looked matronly. He said, "Well, you are a matron." I thought, no, he did not just say that. Story 8. I mentioned to a younger coworker that I have handwriting like a doctor's, so I prefer to type things out. They did not understand because they had only ever known prescriptions to be sent in digitally. They never knew a time when the cryptic scrawl of the doctor's pad was a mysterious surprise every time you went to the pharmacy. Story 9. Doing an internet search on the latest slang to see what it means, I have stopped recognizing celebrity names almost entirely. I have no idea who half of these people are in movies, music, or podcasts. My knees hurt, and I am scared. Also, a teenager on an electric bike whizzed past me at high speed the other day and said, "Sorry, sir," when I jumped out of the way. Story 10. Examining adult content to evaluate the design and quality of their kitchen furniture and countertops. Story 11. When I realized I am no longer in the category of being someone's work spouse, and I am now simply the work mother that everyone comes to for personal and professional advice. Story 12. An adult came up to me to pick up medicine for their grandparent. I was born 1 year after the grandparent. Story 13. Whipped some dog treats down our long hallway to give the boy a little mental stimulation, and it has aggravated my tennis elbow for nearly 2 days now. Story 14. I was joking with a coworker and said, "You have died of dysentery." "What is that?" "The disease? Like from Oregon Trail." "What is Oregon Trail?" "All right, I am gonna head out." Story 15. The middle school students are officially back to wearing the styles that were popular when I was in middle school. I knew it would happen someday, I just was not prepared. Story 16. PlayStation 2 is a retro console. What is charisma? I know now, but I definitely had the Abe Simpson prophecy come true. Story 17. Right now, whenever I sit in a car for more than an hour and then get out to take a break or get gas. Story 18. Saw the sign for my farmer's market this weekend and felt genuine joy and happiness. I really love farmers markets. Story 19. The bags under the eyes. I never thought I would be that sort of vain, but they really bother me and I hate that they bother me. Every other part of me says mid-40s to late 40s. I am in great shape. Until recently, people did not believe I was not in my mid-40s when I told them how old I really was. It blew their minds. I am 56, and growing old is simply reality. But the bags under my eyes that appeared about a year ago fool no one. Story 20. When I was playing Call of Duty today, I was going off on a bunch of enemies and said, "Say hello to my little friend." No one understood the reference. Story 21. When I was in kindergarten, my teacher went on maternity leave. Then, in 5th grade, I was the children's reading buddy. It had a strong impact on me. Story 22. The most recent group of interns sit within earshot of my desk. Overhearing their conversations for 6 hours per day over the past few weeks has been very challenging. Story 23. When I heard that someone my age had to place her husband in a care home because he has Alzheimer's disease, I was 60 in February. Story 24. I bought a few cans of cider the other day using the supermarket self-checkout. That triggered an assistant to come over to verify my age. She did not want to see my driving license and tapped the visibly over 25 button. Outrageous. Fair enough, I am more than double that age, but still, I have never been so insulted. Story 25. My nephew was surprised I could remember September 11th and talked about it as if it had happened 100 years ago. Story 26. When your longtime friends invite you to go out and then cancel at the last minute, I felt relief instead of disappointment. Story 27. Playing video games does not interest me anymore. I try to get into them, but I just cannot. It is too much effort and too time-consuming to play them. I also make an old man noise whenever I stand up or sit down. Story 28. When I made a reference to the Lord of the Rings trilogy at work, I received a room full of blank stares. I was the only person who had seen the movies because they were apparently very old. Only one person was vaguely familiar because they thought it was the show with the main character Galadriel. Story 29. I saw a video on TikTok tonight titled, "What did Ace of Base see?" And no one knew the answer except people 10 years younger than me and older. Story 30. When I told a young secretary that my mother used to put brandy in my milk bottle for teething, she replied, "Yes, but there was no medication back then." Story 31. Today I was picking up a book on hold at the library, and I rifled through the cards in my wallet before I remembered it is an application now. Story 32. Accidentally saw inappropriate messages on my brother's phone. Got furious. Was about to sit him down and have a talk or tell my parents. Realized it is his long-term girlfriend and they are both above 21 years old. Had to grapple with the fact that it is normal and healthy. Story 33. By my early 30s, hearing sports commentators say that an athlete my age or even younger was a veteran, approaching retirement, or past their peak was common. Story 34. When I told them I sometimes buy my favorite band music CDs, they all stared at me like I was from 1850. Story 35. Went for lunch at a Mexican restaurant with my wife on a Sunday. I said to the waitstaff, "It's great here at this time. I have a hard time talking over the music on a Saturday." They said, "Yes, we turn the music down on Sundays for the oldies." Story 36. Remember when you were a male teenager and you could masturbate 5 times a day? Nowadays, I have to recharge longer. Otherwise, the stamina cannot stay in the fight long. Story 37. When any professional athlete is younger than me, I realize I am 30 years old. I feel like I am 82 because of my back. Story 38. I have been on Reddit for approximately 15 years. I used to understand most, if not all, memes, references, jokes, and similar content on the front page. Now, I would say I understand less than half. Story 39. I referenced a current trend and my Generation Z coworker said, "Wow, how do you even know that?" Girl, I have Wi-Fi, not dementia. Story 40. When I had to explain what the Air Bud movie was about, the description is absolutely unhinged if you have not seen it. There is no rule that says dogs cannot play basketball. Story 41. I had taken an old tractor feed printout to a convention to get autographed by a presenter. I had to explain to a small group of people who had never seen one before what a dot matrix printer was. Story 42. I gave a floppy disk as a parting gift to an intern I had been mentoring for a few months, and he replied, "Wow, cool. I once saw a photo of one of these in a textbook." Story 43. I searched YouTube for an old rock playlist. I was thinking of 1970s music. The very first result was Nirvana, Metallica, and others. When did the 1990s become the 1970s? What is going on? Story 44. I have many stories. One was last night. I asked my 11-year-old son if he had seen clips or heard of Gremlins before. He said no. I said, "Okay, let's put it on." I loved this film as a kid. He asked why the picture was so bad. I explained that it was made in 1984, 41 years ago. He watched it for 15 minutes and walked out saying, "Good film." Story 45. When you notice the significant change in the sound of popular music as well as the normalization of low-quality content on social media. When you realize smartphones are the new living room television, and electronic commerce is slowly causing the closure of stores you used to visit regularly a decade ago. When Generation Z is fascinated with 2000 style and aesthetic as if it were the 1980s, observing the cycles in culture and remembering being blissfully naive like some kids today, noticing electric scooters replacing pedal bicycles or push skateboards as a means to get to school. Story 46. When my local oldies station played Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden in their regular rotation, I was doing my grocery shopping when In Bloom came over the in-store public address system. It hit me much harder than it should have. Story 47. What really hits me hard is when I see old movies with people who used to be much older than me but are now much younger. Story 48. Turned 40 last month. Raced my daughters 8 and 6 years old at the park on the weekend. Hurt my hamstring. Story 49. I found an old email I had printed and saved at my desk. I approached one of our new hires and asked where she was on the date stamped at the top. She said 4th grade. Story 50. I felt cool in my new coat as I walked past a couple of young boys who went completely quiet. I thought to myself, funny that they are checking me out since I am so much older. I must look cool in this jacket. As I walked past them, I heard one of the boys burst out, I thought that was our teacher. Story 51. When I had to explain to my cousin's children that George Walker Bush had a father who was also president and what the Soviet Union was. Story 52. In one day, someone was listening to music, and I said, all this new music sounds the same to me. I then put on a classic rock station, and they played Sex on Fire by Kings of Leon, a song from 2006. I banged on the window because some kids were in my garden, and I told them to go to your own garden. Story 53. I am 30 years old and have been working with a 19-year-old intern at work. They use all kinds of goofy phrases and words that I have never heard before. It is kind of funny, really. Story 54. When I am on social media and see multiple notifications about a musician who was arrested or died, and I have never heard of them. Story 55. Mumbling children these days under my breath when the children on my street wake me up from my afternoon post-work nap by riding up and down the road on their dirt bikes. I am only 23. Story 56. That one adult video that came out when you were a teenager that you have seen hundreds of times is now in the vintage section. Story 57. The proliferation of electric scooters has really made me say, geez, where is the fire? And should not you be wearing a helmet if you are going to be zipping through here like that? Way more than is necessary. Story 58. I was in my mid-30s, and a cute, freshly turned 21-year-old invited me to party with her and her friends. No, she was definitely going to be a wildfire that needed to burn out on its own. Story 59. Soon after I started coaching minor Canadian football, a spring six-a-side program was started. Enough kids were registered to split them into 2 teams, and we had 8 coaches. Some were still in high school, some a couple of years beyond that, others were men in their 50s and 60s. I was in my early 30s at the time. Someone had the bright idea to split the coaching staffs into young guys versus old guys. To my surprise and bewilderment, I got lumped in with the gray hairs. Story 60. I realized that all the characters and the actors in shows and movies are younger than me. Also, young people at work started calling me sir. It just happened one day out of nowhere. Story 61. My lungs just randomly stopped working. Also, my knees hurt, my ankle hurts, my shoulder hurts, my back hurts. I have carpal tunnel, gray hairs, memory is declining, hearing is worsening. I make stale dad jokes that only I find funny, and I'm not even a dad. My high school niece's birthday was the same year I graduated. That type of thing. Story 62. When I was on my weekly trip to the university district to shop for used records, I realized I now fit the creepy older man hanging out with college students profile. Story 63. When my regular radio station is not the top 40 and latest hit station but the next generation of music, which plays adult contemporary. Story 64. When I came across Riz for the first time, I had no idea what that meant until I looked it up on Urban Dictionary. Story 65. Going to a concert and everything hurts from my feet to my legs to everything else after a couple of hours of standing. I used to be able to stay in one spot all day or at all weekend festivals. Those days are long gone. Oh, and I will be paying for it after the show if I do not wear proper footwear. I do not care how I look. I am wearing the runners with arch support. Story 66. Needing to print and highlight materials to truly understand them, even though I have an iPad and the new Apple Pencil, is just not the same for me. Story 67. Getting out of bed one morning and pinching my testicles between my legs caused one of them to swell up twice as big as the other and caused massive pain with the lightest pressure for several weeks. Be careful getting out of bed is my new nightly prayer. Story 68. Who shows a bunch of strangers their significant other's naked pictures? I never asked anyone for pictures like that because I do not want them thinking I would do that. You should know better. Story 69. Breaking my hip. I was 34, and it shattered me literally and led to many diagnoses, mostly arthritis. Story 70. Facebook memories showed a photo of 14-year-old me opposite a photo of 33-year-old me. I saw the lines all over my face for the first time ever. So clear. Story 71. An ophthalmologist told me that I need progressive glasses because my eyes are undergoing age-related changes. It is something that reveals your age and affects you no matter what. Story 72. The first time I did not get invited out with the coworkers at work, I realized I am officially the older veteran of the staff and they do not see me as a peer. Story 73. I install and service the radios, computers, and digital video recorder equipment that are installed in city vehicles. Whether they are police, fire, medical, water, animal control, or others. I was lying on the floor of the shop running antenna cables to the box of a new ambulance. After 15 minutes of doing this, my back was sore, and I could not get up for about 5 more minutes. Story 74. Today, when I took my daughter to Hot Topic in the mall, she was old enough to fit in, and I felt like an old man. Story 75. I was in line at Wendy's, and there were people younger than me being themselves. I turned to my husband and said, "Shouldn't these kids be in school?" Story 76. Seeing Pokemon cards I used to collect when I was younger becoming more and more expensive, which consisted of the Generation 6 to Generation 7 era for me. Story 77. This year I have bought strawberry, blackberry, raspberry, and blueberry plants, and I am genuinely excited to see the fruits growing. Story 78. In Roblox, when a game I play gets an update and a new friend joins after the update, the friend says, "I'm new here." I say, "Wow, I can teach you the game. I have played this game for years." Story 79. One of the younger tanker drivers who comes into my workplace had never heard of Sean Connery or Kenneth Williams. Story 80. I always said I would feel old when I am older than the president. I am 56 and that still has not happened, sadly. Story 81. When a friend who is younger than me announced he would be a father, for a moment I thought of saying, "I'm sorry," as if it were a teenage pregnancy, until I realized we are not teenagers anymore. Story 82. Actually, it was a good moment in theory. Every doctor for a couple of decades had been blaming everything on my weight. My finger hurts. Maybe try losing some weight. So I lost 12 stone. Doctor, I've lost a ton of weight, but still have constant back pain. Ah, that's just because you're getting old. Yes, a new catch-all excuse. That's progress. Story 83. Read a flyer about the credentials and accomplishments of my new primary care physician while waiting in the lobby. Specializes in geriatrics. Story 84. 2 generations have grown up engrossed by Pokemon, adult animation, anime, tentacle animation, Marvel and DC Comics, and Studio Ghibli. To hear them tell it, everyone spent their childhood reading every comic they could find. I asked my friends from elementary school in the 1970s, and not a single one read Marvel or DC Comics. I have no idea what is going on. Story 85. Your body becomes weak, and if you do not maintain strength, you will be in pain for a few weeks. Story 86. My favorite music as a teenager is now part of the soundtrack played in the local discount supermarket. Story 87. When Dr. Dre's album The Chronic turned 30 in 2022, I was 8 years old when I had that cassette tape. There were many TDK and Fujifilm tapes during that time. There is nothing better than being a 1980s baby raised in the 1990s. Story 88. I took my nephew to the movies to see a children's movie. All the jokes for the parents were aimed at my generation. Story 89. Never went to college. I was hanging out with a friend who was. We went to her dorm and were going out to the bar. Her roommates were not old enough to go. I realized I had become officially older than college students at that point. Story 90. I was quite good on a computer when I was in my teens. Now I struggle because I don't use one all the time, and my teenager often comes over and shows me how to do things. Story 91. I was coming back from my friend's brother's wedding, and the bus we were traveling in had all his little cousins and extended family. Everyone was choosing bland music, and my friend handed me the phone to play a song he could dance to. I played a song I knew was a certified hit since everybody I've met likes it. But a kid in the back asked me, "What song is this?" Surprised, I asked him how old he was. The song predates that kid. The kid was about 6 and I was only 16. Story 92. Just watched Karate Kid with my son. I checked the age of Pat Morita, the actor who played Mr. Miyagi, when it was filmed. He was my age. Story 93. I was at the airport, and they let the elderly board first. I am 48 years old, and they let me board as well. That hurt. Story 94. When something that was once disliked because the younger generation was into it becomes beloved as those same individuals grow up and feel nostalgic about it. This happened with Minecraft and is currently happening with Fortnite. It will likely happen with whatever new trend becomes popular with the next generation of young people. Story 95. I was writing some fiction and planning that one part would take place in the 1990s and the other in modern day 30 years later. Story 96. I got excited about buying some binoculars. I even researched them for half a day. I have not used them yet. Story 97. I went back to university as a mature student, age 30. Everyone was getting to know each other and sharing social media, including Snapchat. I had never heard of it, so I asked what it was all about. "Sounds kind of dumb to me," was my response. It was then that I realized I was old. Story 98. Number theory is like being a detective, but instead of looking for clues about a crime, you are trying to uncover the hidden rules and relationships within the world of whole numbers. It is a fascinating area with deep connections to other fields of mathematics and even computer science and cryptography. Story 99. A young man at my job got himself into trouble because of his bad attitude and being influenced by the older employees in the warehouse. I was talking to the operations manager about the situation and referred to the young man, who was about 19 or 20 years old, as just a kid. I was 26 at the time and felt old. Story 100. Appetite for Destruction by Guns N' Roses came out when I was in 7th grade. One day, I heard Welcome to the Jungle on classic rock radio. I wasn't prepared for that. Story 101. I asked a cousin I haven't seen in a while about his sister's child I first met as a baby a few years ago, around 2007. He said, "What child?" "He is in college." I am literally still in denial. I feel like I am that age. Will I still feel 18 in my head when I am 80? I am not sure that is a bad thing, really. Story 102. This happened so long ago that the kid I am about to reference has his own kid. I mentioned a show that aired before he was born, and he looked really confused. Then I did the math and understood why he looked so confused. Why would he understand that reference? It was from before he was born. At this point, it is a 24-year-old show. That show was called Roller Jam, which is also the name of a recent show that has nothing to do with the original, and I dislike that. It also makes me feel old. But seriously, why are things being named the same as previous things that have zero connection to them? I feel like there are more examples than just Roller Jam, but I do not remember what they are because I am old. In conclusion, Roller Jam. Story 103. Anytime you reference a comedian, people do TikTok dance imitations, face reels, and brag about mental illness. They do not cite stand-up comedians. Story 104. Enjoy doing laundry, from buying detergent to folding clothes. Still hate ironing though. Story 105. I started wearing Open Run Shocks headphones, and a boy in my son's class said, Why are you wearing hearing aids? They look like hearing aids, and now I can't get that out of my mind. Story 106. I recently got upset because my grocery store stopped carrying my favorite brand of cottage cheese. Then, I realized I had a favorite brand of cottage cheese. Story 107. When someone born in 2006 came in to buy cigarettes, he was able to because he was old enough. In my country, you first had to be 16, now it is 18, and he turned 18 just 3 days ago. I was shocked. This was in 2024. Story 108. Watching television with closed captions on, then having to get a bigger television so you can see everything. I am 41 and refuse to get my eyes checked. Story 109. I had a cavity at my last dental appointment, and after they filled it, the dentist mentioned it might be time to consider a crown or root canal for that tooth in the near future. I thought, oh dang, okay. But it didn't hit me until I got in my car, checked the tooth in the mirror, and saw how much darker that tooth was. Story 110. Not mine, but a friend who works at a school with children aged 6 to 12 told me he felt much older when one of the children he supervised after he started working there one day became his colleague. Story 111. When my 6-hour shift ended up being 8 hours because of store recovery after a big sale, every bone in my body hurt. Story 112. When I experience a body part malfunctioning for a couple of days, such as the knee, ankle, wrist, or finger, and then it returns to normal without any explanation. Story 113. When I walked into a clothing store, I immediately thought, get out of here. The music is way too loud. Story 114. When my former supervisor's son came to work for me, my supervisor left to go out west to be near his son and help raise him. Story 115. I went to a Death from Above concert and was getting coffee the next day. The barista said, my parents were there. Of course they were. I am exhausted. Story 116. My husband and I are rewatching Scrubs for the first time in nearly 10 years. All of the main characters are just so young. The janitor mentioned being 37, a year older than me and a year younger than my husband, and we both figuratively crumbled into dust. Story 117. I was standing in line at the grocery store and had 3 realizations at once. 1. The music playlist was awesome. I had no idea who any of the celebrities on the cover of the gossip magazines actually were. Point number 2 did not bother me at all. I asked the employee at the register for my senior discount card. Story 118. I was thinking about this yesterday. There are very few public interactions between strangers these days, yet everyone is talking because everyone, except me, has the little buttons in their ears and is talking on the phone. Story 119. When younger employees at work started asking me how to do tasks, I was the person asking the more experienced employee for guidance. Now, they have retired, and I have become the more experienced employee. Story 120. There is a G-Star advertisement for clothing here on Reddit, in which everything is just wrong for my taste. That is how I know. Story 121. The moment I heard someone from Generation Z say that memes are their thing, I was already a 9-gag original gangster in 2011 when I was 21. Story 122. When I could not understand what the children are saying nowadays, I am not familiar with the new slang terms anymore. Laughing out loud. Story 123. I'm 24 and from the United Kingdom. I had a damn, I'm getting old moment. Yes, I know 24 isn't old. I was 13 when the Xbox One came out, and the fact that kids born in 2014 will be starting secondary school next year frightened me a bit. However, I worked for a freight forwarding company from 2020 to 2024, from age 19 to 23. Seeing my work colleagues' faces when I told them I was born in 2001 will always be priceless. I was the youngest in the office. Story 124. Buying a $25 India Pale Ale at a Blink-182 concert and deciding on the card I wanted to use for the triple rewards points I get on dining out. When I got back to my seats, I was relieved to see everyone in my section still seated, so I did not have to stand during the show. I took a moment and thought back to what it was like when I saw them 20 years before and nearly fainted. Thank God I was sitting down. Story 125. I was a 5th batch student at our university. Last week, I heard about a welcome festival for the 21st batch students, and I thought, Damn. Story 126. Half the radio stations I grew up with are gone. I understand that radio changes too, but I really miss 94.1 kmps and KISS 106.1. Story 127. Talking to Generation Alpha kids about Harry Styles and learning that they have never heard of One Direction. Story 128. When my friend's 14-year-old daughter said to me upon receiving her new tablet at Christmas, "What were tablets like when you were my age?" Story 129. After Dr. Dre performed at the Super Bowl years ago, I did a Google search starting with who. One of the suggested autocompletes was, "Who was the white rapper?" Story 130. I told my little brother that when I was a kid, the television did not have internet, and he said, "So it was just a loading screen?" I am old. Story 131. I was at a dealership, and the guy told me he was currently driving a Bronco Raptor. I said, "Oh, that must be a hoot." He blankly stared at me for longer than necessary and asked, "What is a hoot?" So I simplified it and replied, "You know, like a hoot and a holler to drive around." He apologized and said he had never heard that phrase before. After that, we quietly walked through the parking lot. He did not make the sale. Story 132. When my great plan for the weekend is to enjoy a book, a movie, or a series by myself without interruptions, responsibilities, or schedules. Story 133. I prefaced a story with the sentence, "What year were you born?" and began a story with, "Well, before you were born." The young man was born in 2002, and I was telling a story about how Sean Combs was huge in the late 1990s since he did not really know who he was. Story 134. My husband and I had been looking for a bin. Specifically, it had to be a foot pedal bin that was heavy enough so our small cats couldn't stand on it to open it. It also had to be rectangular and relatively slim to fit in the space we needed. When we found exactly that, we were very excited and talked about it for hours. We ended the conversation with, "God, we're old now, aren't we?" We decided we didn't care and proceeded to tell everyone in our life about our great bin purchase. That was about 2 years ago. We were both 23. Story 135. I went to the local bakery and entered the store at the same time as a couple of tradesmen, painters by the looks of their overalls. "You go first, old fella," one of them suggested. Story 136. When I use expressions like "in my time" or "back in the day when I was younger," and I am only 24 years old. Story 137. I am currently volunteering at a summer camp. One of the counselors said, "I am watching this show. It is old. It is called Lost." Story 138. Worrying about the poor spelling of Reddit posts and daring to correct them, only to get downvoted and abused in the process. Story 139. Being asked by a coworker, "What is dial-up internet?" That, and being excited over nice new sheets or towels. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.